Susan was an active duty nurse during the Vietnam War. In 1969, she was tried and found guilty by General Court-Martial for conduct unbecoming an officer for dropping anti-war leaflets over 5 military bases in the San Francisco Bay Area. And wearing her uniform in the GI and Veterans March for Peace on October 12, 1968. She has had an amazing career in nursing and has been a lifelong activist around ongoing issues related to the Vietnam War, especially the health effects of Agent Orange. In 2006, Susan was awarded the Medal for Peace and Friendship between Peoples by the Vietnam Union of Friendship Organizations. Randy Rowland. One of the Presidio 27, who just days before the sit-down had ceremoniously turned himself in after going AWOL at the Presidio gates at the end of the GI and Veterans March for Peace. Randy was raised in a conservative military family, and after leaving college in 1967, he joined the Army and was stationed at Fort Lewis near Tacoma, Washington. Trained as a medic, Roland found himself taking care of paralyzed and severely wounded men without a convincing explanation for all of the suffering he was seeing. Roland's early experience as a medic were just the beginning of a long process of questioning and political transformation that would lead him throughout the course of the Vietnam War to a life of activism. He served a 1.5-year jail sentence in Leavenworth Penitentiary for his involvement with the Presidio 27. He is a retired registered nurse from Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. Brendan Sullivan was one of the Army defense attorneys for the Presidio 27. He is a senior partner at the DC law firm Williams & Connolly LLP. Mr. Sullivan is recognized nationally as one of the best known and most able trial lawyers in America with an extraordinary record of success. The National Law Journal regularly lists him as among, quote, America's 100 most influential lawyers. He is well known for his defense of high-profile clients, including Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North during Iran-Contra hearings. In 2017, Mr. Sullivan was awarded the Champion of Justice Award from the Mid-Atlantic Innocent Project, an organization dedicated to fighting injustice in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia by bringing comprehensive legal assistance to individuals facing wrongful convictions and incarceration. David Courtwright. David is a professor of peace studies and director of policy studies at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. He is the author or editor of 20 books, including Soldiers in Revolt, published originally in 1975 and again reissued in 2005, which happens to be the selection for the Presidio Book Club this coming Saturday. I encourage you to attend. You never have to read the book. It's low-stakes book club. In 2002, he co-founded Win Without War, a coalition opposing war in Iraq and advocating peaceful international security policies. Courtwright served in the U.S. Army 1968 to 71, at Fort Hamilton, New York, and Fort Bliss, Texas, and was actively involved in the GI anti-war movement. And last but not least, we have Jeff Paterson, who became the first first of many U.S. military personnel to refuse to fight in Iraq in August 1990.
Your generation.
Thanks. When the Presidio mutiny happened, I was a few days old. And later, when I joined the Marine Corps, I was 18. The Vietnam War could have been the U.S. Civil War. Could have been some historical footnote. World War II, kind of the same thing, I thought. And I joined today's military, the modern military, not the bad military of the historic 17, 18, 1900s. And it took me 4 years with the 3rd Marines to kind of come to my senses that I actually wasn't helping the people of Okinawa and Japan. And it took me somebody saying that I personally might have the opportunity to set the nuclear fuse so we could annihilate what they call ragheads. And it took that thing in my mind. It's like, I didn't think it was going to happen, but certainly it was a possibility, because if anything went wrong over there in Iraq, it was going to be my opportunity to do a nuclear holocaust type thing. And that's my turn. And for me, it was like a very personal thing. There was no movement. Iraq had just invaded Kuwait a few hours prior to that. But I was hoping that maybe if I stood up, somebody else would see something in the newspaper about that. And you didn't ask the question, but hearing these stories, I just think back to this one story. It's like, I held a press conference outside my base to explain why I was against the war in Iraq and why I wasn't intending to get on the plane that evening with my artillery regiment. And while I was giving that press conference, my whole unit was gathered around watching me on the TV at the staging area at the hangar. We're at the barracks there. And when I came back, I turned myself in to the MPs, and they marched me over to the barracks, which was only a few blocks away. And there was my unit, 150 odd people, lining the railways of this 3-story barracks we had. And they intentionally marched me below the railing. It was my first sergeant and my captain had me, and they were sort of trying to drag me. And so my whole unit could yell at me and whatnot. And some did. They started chanting war, war. And then some of them started spitting on me, and that sort of sucked, right? But then some of them started chanting peace, peace, and we had people like chanting war, and we had chanting peace, and we had dozens of guys spitting on me. But there was dozens of guys who were taking the opportunity to spit on the commanding officer. So I'm thinking, this was worth it. This was a good fight. That was sort of the highlight. And later on, I refused to get on the airplane, and people threatened to murder me. People threatened to kill my family if I didn't get on there when I got back from Iraq. And it was a very surreal kind of evening. But I do, going back to, it made all the difference to have a community of support there when I was going through trials, looking at 5 years in prison. It was awesome to have a civilian attorney work with my military defense attorney. Instead of 5 years, I only did a few months in the Pearl Harbor brig. It wasn't as shitty as the Presidio, I guess. So I was happy about that. But I expected to do 5 years in Leavenworth. And when the Iraq War started in 2004, I tried to take what I learned about having a community support and legal and material aid for families, and that's how we grew up Courage to Resist, and we supported resistor local military people that become local activists here in the San Francisco area. Stephen Funk, Pablo Paredes. We defended Lieutenant Aaron Matata, the first military officer who refused to fight in Iraq. I led the successful 7-year effort to free Chelsea Manning, military intelligence officer. I also kicked off the less successful attempt to defend Reality Winner, and a whistleblower. She's serving a 5-year sentence at this time. And at this time, we are trying to work with people in the military who are angry that President Trump has ordered them to build massive immigrant detention camps in the deserts. They're expecting to house tens of thousands of immigrants on military bases, primarily along the southern border on contaminated lands. And we see these posters right here in the Presidio talking about the Japanese internment camps, and this is the modern day, version of that. I'm hoping that more and more people in the military will speak up and do something. So that's what Courage to Resist is up to. And, I know a lot of you here support us. I appreciate that.
Jeff, as a historian, I have to say I'm curious when you said that Vietnam wasn't in your headspace at all, right? When you were in the military, and this is history, but it's also a history that's kind of been forgotten about, right? The GI movement, GI activism. And I wonder if all the panelists could kind of weigh in a little bit about what it means to remember this, why it's important to know these stories, a little bit about kind of historical memory.
Again, I was post-mute. A lot of what I believe that's important is telling the stories of the Iraq War, the Gulf War resistors. More than 100 of us in the Gulf War spoke out against that war, and at least 100 of us were imprisoned. There was almost 20 Marines that were taken to Camp Lejeune and were court-martialed en masse for refusing to fight in the Gulf War. And that's a history that's kind of forgotten. And trying to do something different now with the last people stepping forward. Again, like in my mind, it really wasn't until I refused, and then Vietnam era veterans, many people in this room stepped forward to support me. I realized that I had this commonality. It wasn't a historical thing. And as I was preparing to refuse publicly, people gave me a VHS tape of the FTA movie, for example. I'm like, oh shit, I'm not the first person to think of this. So that's sort of where I was at.
Yeah, I think we need to have this history in our minds and tell the stories continuously so that those today who are struggling with the same issues, and there are many people in the military who are questioning. They were questioning it after the invasion. There were movements, the Iraqi Veterans Against the War came out, the appeal for redress, 2,000 active duty and reserve members signed an appeal to Congress. And today, even there are many who are asking these questions. And we need to come back to this history constantly because America remains a militaristic society. We are still involved in these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and now other wars in Iraq, Libya, and you don't even know how many countries we're bombing or have our troops in nowadays. And this militarization is continuing to drag down our country economically, financially, socially, politically, and we have to keep fighting it and resisting it. And hopefully these stories from those of us who are inside the green machine who spoke out and have shown that we were successful and we were on the right side of history, that story can continue to be told and inspire further resistance and action today.
the Presidio 27, and how and why the guys sat down because they were sick of the terrible conditions in the stockade. And we also talked about the detention centers. Because we're allowing it to happen, are sending 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old children, separating them from their families, and sending them thousands of miles away to these detention centers. Yes, we have the exhibit about what we did during the Second World War to the Japanese went as families. These are children, and it continues, and it's getting worse. And I'll say again, because we're allowing it to happen, because we're not there, because we're not protesting it enough, and because we're not stopping it enough. And I do think that we elders have an obligation to draw the connections between what happened and what we did to protest the war and stockade conditions and what we need to do today. And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about how horrific the stockade conditions are, but what on earth is going on in these private prisons, private federally funded prisons that lock up black and brown people for what? For drugs? That if you have the resources, you get out of jail and you don't have to serve a sentence. It goes back to what happened during our military activism. If we were smart enough, if we had the resources, we could have attorneys that would protect us and that we knew we were getting the best support possible. But there are people in this country, and the division gets larger and larger every day, who don't have those resources and who keep on being beaten down. And we've got to do something. And I think it's making the connections, it's making those connections between wars, it's making those connections between the military and the police, it's making the connections and saying, we're going to stop it.
So we've been talking about how the GI movement fit into a larger story of social change and how it's a tactic of social change and part of a long trajectory of social change. Would some of the panelists speak to how the GI movement helped to end the Vietnam War?
I have to say this, that the war ended because the Vietnamese won their struggle. In the military, we did a part of the organizing to say the war is wrong and it's unconscionable. We did a part of it. The civilian anti-war movement did a part of it. And I'm looking around the room and seeing a lot of, I don't want to say old faces, but people I've known for many years. And your interest is the continuing injustice that goes on. And we continue to have to do this. So you all played a really important role, whether it was as an attorney, as a protester, as somebody who was in the stockade. And that's what we need to do now, is to join together. And I may need your services, Brendan, at some point in time, but it's all of us. So the GI movement played a role, but so important to understand that it was the Vietnamese who won their, my God, 2,000-year-old struggle for liberation.
So a question for Jeff. How is GI resistance different now? Or the same? Or how's it compared to this kind of thing?
It's interesting, right? There's no longer a draft. So we're dealing with people who joined the military out of the sense of misplaced patriotism, out of the concrete issues of poverty, social, personal crisis. There's always, it's like, I joined as I thought, a true believer. I went into the Marine Corps officer and he asked me what, job I wanted, and I said, well, whatever job I could be most helpful in. So it was those true, but there's also something when people realize that they're lied to, that it's not what we signed up for. That I wasn't looking forward to going to kill people, but I assumed I would have to kill people, but I was 100% certain that the people I was going to kill were 100% bad people, and I was 100% good. And as I spent years in the Marine Corps, I realized that wasn't true. And when I was promised I might, drop nuclear artillery rounds on people in towns in Iraq, I knew that wasn't true. And right now, the military is dealing with drones and robots and all this stuff, and they're able to deal with volunteers for the most part, relatively small tens of thousands of people on the ground in all these countries. And we see the waves of resistance when they start pulling in the reservists and the National Guards and putting all those people in Iraq and Afghanistan. So right now we're dealing with relatively few people that are taking public stands, realizing that the military is going to come down on them. And at the moment, we're dealing with people who are anonymously trying to share the information about what's going on with the immigrant concentration camps that we believe are illegal. It's not the military's job to do policing within the United States, and that's what they're being ordered to do, and house tens of thousands of immigrants. And it's wrong, it's immoral, and yet it's very scary to come up and say that in front of a president, right, who of course will name them personally and ensure command influence, make sure they get years in prison. Reality Winner, for example, 5 years in prison for one single document questioning Trump's narrative about the elections. People realize that the stakes are high, and I think there's going to be resistors, and we're trying to make sure that they know we're going to be there to support them. For example, we're running Facebook campaigns directed at those areas of those bases towards military people, letting them know that there is a basis to support the question, what's going on, question their orders.
Good job.
Yeah, just one point further on that. I think what Jeff said is important about people who are doing so for a variety of reasons, often for the benefits, the educational benefits that have some employment options. But they really want to believe, and they've been taught that what they're doing is the right thing. And when they find out it's not the case, or when they think that the legal foundation or the moral foundation of what we're doing is questionable, they're willing to begin to question. And the challenge is how to do that. We have